IVM.
We would like to thank Storytel for sponsoring this show. Storytel is an audiobook platform that lets you hear hundreds of thousands of stories on your mobile, on your PC, wherever you prefer. You can get a great deal by signing up at the URL storytel.com/IVM. So this week I'm going to recommend Watership Down by Richard Adams. It's a quirky book. It's the story of a group of rabbits, how they face the destruction of their den and subsequent escape and journey to their new home. It's funny, it's heartwarming, really cool. It's basically Exodus with rabbits. I think you'll enjoy it if you haven't read it before, and let me tell you a little bit about where you can go get it. Go get it at storytel.com/IVM, and you know what will happen? If you go and sign up on this link, you'll get your first month for just 99 rupees a month instead of $299. That's $200 off. Go get this book right now. You'll really enjoy it.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Aditya Ramanathan, and I'm joined today by Aditya Pareek. So this is going to be one of those episodes with two Adityas. And I've got Aditya Pareek with me today because he's read what he considers a very special book. And now I haven't read this book myself, but Pareek has. And I'm persuaded that it's a special book because of the author's own record, for one. And also because I went through his endnotes and references and was very impressed. The book in question is Andrew Boyd's British Naval Intelligence Through the 20th Century. Now, I know that I'm in danger of losing some of our listeners here, so I'll ask them to just hang on and give us a try. Now, here's why I think we should talk about this book. One, like I've mentioned, it seems to be a terrific bit of scholarship, right? So I can't personally wait to get cracking on this book myself. Two, the author, Andrew Boyd, has written at least one other excellent book titled The Royal Navy in Eastern Waters, which was about how the British handled the fighting at sea in the early years of the Second World War. And number three, I really think that, what are books like this ultimately about? They're at their heart about complex organizations, grappling with conflict, grappling with politics, rapidly changing technology. So really, any such book is really ultimately about us here in India today. Three, I finally think that any such books are a lot of fun in their own right, but that just may be me. You don't have to share that taste. Two, I think appreciate the conversation we're about to have. So firstly, welcome to All Things Policy once again, Aditya.
Hi, Aditya. It's great to be here again.
Yeah. Now, let's get cracking on this. Firstly, what got you thinking about reading this book, and what is it that struck you most in this book about how British naval intelligence operated through the 20th century, right? Because this is covering a large expanse of time. And, we're talking about the First World War, the Second World War, and the Cold War. And it's a time of massive technological change. What really struck you about the book and about the way that British naval intelligence operated through this long period of time?
This book was on my radar since it was announced. But I came across it on US Naval Institute Press's website as one of the new publications. And a book that claims to be an aggregate history of almost a century for such a esteemed service as the Royal Navy, and one of the branches of the Royal Navy's entire structure. So I was fascinated that somebody was attempting to capture the history of such an esteemed service, which gets rarely spoken about, but the impact of its actions are seen in the wider geopolitical world that we live in. So I was persuaded to at least try, and being a 800-page tome, I was persuaded that it would keep me company for a long time. That's why I picked it up. Coming to the book itself, I think it gave me a better understanding of how the UK operates quite like India. I mean, studying it feels very much like you're studying our own country. Because honestly, since we retain a lot of the signature Commonwealth culture in our official institutions, the sheer number of bureaucratic structures that the sailor spooks have to convince is just monumental. And we see something very similar with the Indian naval establishment and the security establishment in general. Another thing that I learned from this book would be the way 1800s British government formed different committees from which one British intelligence service emerged to another. So this was a pattern from which the British naval establishment also got its naval intelligence service. So the book itself, when you talk about the text, the author approaches the subject in a way where he shows you that during the Napoleonic Wars, back then, naval intelligence was a very informal business. The formal business starts in the late 1800s and came to its zenith, I'd say, in the First World War when Room 40 was a thing, and the Zimmerman telegram just overnight made them stars. So, pre-Great War, Naval Intelligence Department was revolutionary for the UK's capability in terms of, assessing where its rivals as well as allies were. So when you're in the business of spooks, you're not just looking at your enemy, you're also looking at your allies and assessing what kind of strategic power they can bear to when you're planning your fleet. So the Naval Intelligence Department was also involved with that.
Yeah, so, obviously, naval intelligence, just to take a few steps back here, is a branch of military intelligence. And it's obviously studying militaries of other countries, both allies and adversaries, as Pareek so rightly pointed out. Now, Pareek, when we talk about these particular conflicts, there are some particular first association words that pop up, right? If it's First World War, it's Room 40. If it's Second World War, it's Ultra. And if it's the Cold War, it's all about nuclear submarines. How does the author treat these subjects, and how does he contextualize them in the wider framework of how naval intelligence was conducted during these confrontations?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, in our current day and age, you would see a lot of people who served during the Cold War from the Western countries who were primarily dealing with the Soviet Union as their adversary. Today are coming up with their own sources of information, their private accounts of how they fought the Cold War in matters of forward deployments or covert operations, which included intelligence gathering as well. So submarines in general hog a lot of, attention compared to the other apparatus which are available to any intelligence agency, any intelligence branch of a military service. So the author at least has done justice, I would say, to the other apparatus of the British Naval Intelligence Establishment, including the human and immense aspects of it. So, human, as we know, is the human intelligence that...
Sure, yeah, human intelligence. It's what you get out of human sources, yeah.
Yeah. And for imagery intelligence is just taking pictures of things that would prove beneficial for strategic assessment back at home, so that you can talk about the enemy or the adversary's capabilities with a much more informed knowledge base. So this was important for the US establishment in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Rather, they just found out that they had a crisis at their hands because of IMINT. So the Royal Navy's IMINT assets, airborne IMINT assets, as well as the Royal Air Force's IMINT capability was just as important in the Second World War as they were for the Americans in the Cold War, and the RAF and RNs just as well in the Cold War.
Right. This is very interesting. Aditya, we could do a normal greatest hits of the First and Second World Wars, talk about Room 40, acquiring the SKM code book, the operations around luring German submarines in. We could talk about, similarly, the Ultra codes during the Second World War. But I suspect those require and deserve separate episodes of their own. What I want to get into is what you have alluded to in our previous conversations as some of the more spicy or more interesting parts of Andrew Boyd's book. Now, obviously, this is a very sober work, but he does not hesitate to take names, right? Especially the name of Mountbatten, someone very familiar with to us in India. What does Boyd say about Mountbatten and his role, whether good or bad, in British naval intelligence?
Well, The author's opinion is, very balanced about Mountbatten. And when he was Chief of Defence Staff of the UK back in 1959, Mountbatten was central in bringing together the other branches of the British military's intelligence services and make a new defence intelligence staff out of them. And like any country where jointmanship hasn't exactly been a tradition, it was quite hard. And Mountbatten was a central figure to that. But obviously, a person at the top cannot exactly dictate to people who are chiefs of their respective services and other functionaries of the British government. So definitely there was pushback. And, when you talk about this period, 1959 to the 70s, there was this debate in the UK that, hey, where do we invest in? And this question can only be answered when you have a educated opinion on the matter. And that education is not going to come from the open domain, at least back then. Now we have the internet, we have the luxury of open source intelligence, if you will. But back then, things were in the hands of the spooks exclusively. So today you can easily get images about just about any country's naval vessels, and you can more or less tell what kind of capabilities can they field in the future. But back in Mountbatten's CDS days, they didn't have this luxury. So there had to be jointmanship, and the Royal Navy had to think of its budget. The other branches had to think of their budget, and the efficient use of resources is an argument people were swayed by back then. They are swayed by now as well. So condensing this down to it, the Royal Navy had so much on its mind back in the Cold War, when the Soviets were at their prime in the 70s, that we're just moving a bit ahead of Mountbatten. So in the 70s, the author talks a lot about the submarines and the strategic nuclear deterrent, which was exclusively given to the Royal Navy as their charge for the UK. So this was a bearing that was quite heavy on the Royal Navy, because, it's not as if that the other branches get devoid of their part in the nuclear forces, and exclusively the Royal Navy is now henceforth responsible for the UK's nuclear deterrence. So that was a burden that they were struck with, and they had to rely on the naval intelligence apparatus within the defense intelligence staff. So back then, the Royal Navy was thinking about a lot of things. This even materialized when Argentina tried their unsuccessful bid to take over the Falklands in 1982. It was an intelligence failure, but, well, the Royal Navy had a lot to deal with at the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, this is the period of time when naval intelligence becomes, it's no longer a matter of a single branch. It's, it has to be necessarily deeply integrated. It has to be several branches of government, including civilian intelligence, contributing to the overall naval intelligence picture. But, getting back to the Falklands, on the one hand, Britain is involved in this great contest between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. But at that time, in April 1982, there is, like you pointed out, this massive intelligence failure. Does Boyd go into how that happened? Were there structural reasons why the UK didn't pay enough attention to what was going on in the Southern Atlantic? Or was it just something that nobody could have expected?
Well, this is a similar pattern in just about every country. And I am kind of paraphrasing what the author talks about. So he basically alludes to the fact that the Royal Navy was, as I previously said, dealing with a lot at the time. And the whole British security establishment was dealing with a lot at the time. So Argentina just wasn't on the radar. There was a threat from 1833 that, someday the Falklands is going to be a flashpoint and you're going to have to deploy forces to protect it. But when the war actually came in 1982, they just didn't have the intelligence that they could have referred to. The intelligence gathering happened after the war started. after the problem was already there. So when the war actually happened, and once the Argentinian POWs were in custody of the UK, things were different. When the Royal Navy had a chance to gather SIGINT against Argentinian forces, things were a bit different. But that all was as if they were trying to build a castle overnight, which you can do, but it's going to be hard. Okay, so the Exocet missiles are kind of a hallmark thing when you talk about the Falkland War. So the targeting algorithms, where the UK got them, well, we don't exactly know. Nobody knows. But yeah, certain French cooperation was there. This has been alluded to by former members of the British apparatus, which were in service back then. So yeah, naval intelligence had what to do with it remains a mystery, but I would speculate that, yeah, they had some involvement there.
Yeah, that does make sense. We've heard a lot about France's cooperation with the United Kingdom during the Falklands War. Now, Pareek, finally, I just want to get a sense of how the author sees the broad evolution of British naval intelligence through this period. Is there a enduring theme to this book that you find? That's number one. Two, even the best of books do have their drawbacks. Is there something about this book that you didn't like, or that others who found problematic or perhaps incomplete?
So, to give you a general sense of what the author is up to in his text, let me just quote a small little part and excerpt from it. This is from the introduction, but this would give you a good sense of what he's done. So this is something that he is only covering in the last part of the book, part 5, which deals with the Cold War. But this gives you the general picture. So furthermore, the Soviet threat during the Cold War was never an exclusive preoccupation for British naval intelligence. The retreat from the empire and its residual responsibilities was a significant focus for the Royal Navy until the 1970s. 1/3 of its frontline strength was deployed east of Suez in the 1960s, and the confrontation with Indonesia over its claims to Malaysia had the potential to become a major naval war. Then the year 1982 brought the Falklands War and the requirements to build a major intelligence capability against Argentina almost from scratch. Naval intelligence has also contributed to modern needs in unexpected ways. The geographic studies of Iraq, originally produced by Naval Intelligence Department in the 1920s, proved invaluable to American and British planners in the Second Iraq War in 2003. Now, coming to the things that, one of my professors told me that whenever you're reviewing a book, it should never be a hagiography. You shouldn't say everything nice about the book. There would definitely be downsides that you would have observed when you were reviewing the book. And this is something that I just want to, follow through on. Yeah, there were things that I noticed, but they weren't significant. I would say the book is excellent because it's tackling, first of all, a huge subject, and it's the author's discretion what he chooses to omit or just touch upon, not exactly expand and spend pages upon pages on. So, for example, the author talks about submarine operations. Definitely he does. But he's very cautious in saying that, this isn't the only thing that is giving you intelligence. There are other parts of the apparatus that I mentioned, human, imment. So, one more thing I kind of forgot to mention. So, in the interwar years, naval attaches were very important to the UK. They played an important role in gathering intelligence. So just as observers, when you send somebody to an embassy in another country, they're there observing everything, and intelligence, like all worthy pursuits in life, is about shoveling a lot of dirt for that one golden nodule. So intelligence is a very similar thing, and personally for me, I would never see defense attaches the same ever again. I mean, I would be more enamored by the kind of things that they do. I've met several in my life. I have shaken hands with them at conferences, and I feel that, the work that they do is not just posting because the structure demands it, but rather they're contributing something which we would perhaps never know of. Something that they're unsung heroes is what I felt after reading this book. That naval attaches are so very important to a country's maritime security. The fact became apparent to me after reading this text. However, there are a few things which at this point I feel is a bit nitpicky when you talk about the way the author has woven his historical narrative, especially for the warriors, the Second World War and the pre-war. So the author offers a lot of information about how the British naval intelligence apparatus was talking about the German fast electro boats. But he just touches upon it. He goes into details about very specific parts. And I would say if you were to read a more focused history somewhere about German submarines and how the British naval intelligence establishment was looking at them, I think you would do more justice to this subject. But being an aggregate history, it has its limits. So, for example, he's only talking about things until May 1944. And he barely talks about the inshore U-boat campaign, which was a problem towards the end of the war because, Normandy landings, I also find this interesting that the Normandy landings are portrayed in popular culture as if, the Allies have almost won. But the thing is, Germany hadn't stopped fighting just yet. The U-boats still existed, although now they would lose their bases in France. They still had some in Norway. So they were still fighting. And at this point, submarine technology in German hands was definitely reaching its zenith, even if their production capability wasn't the same anymore under the Allied bombing effort and the tide of the war turning and the Allies now almost winning. So the author talks about, for example, snorkel, the capability that gave German submarines the ability to stay submerged for most of the time and to charge their batteries. So this was important because they were suffering losses because of radar being in the arsenal of the Allies. So that was a huge, significant strategic advantage to the Germans now, but it came quite a bit late. However, since we're dealing with a intelligence book, a book about the intelligence establishment, I find it very difficult to digest the fact that the author doesn't talk about Courier, Kurier.
Yeah.
It was a short burst communication system which was being developed for the German submarines. The author doesn't talk about it. I mean, SIGINT is an important part of the naval intelligence's mandate. So I don't know how they missed it, but it's not being talked about.
Yeah, I guess these are just part of the fundamental challenges of writing a kind of survey history of this sort. I can tell you, even when we engage in far more modest endeavors like doing a military history podcast, the amount of stuff that we end up leaving behind, leaving out is, it's agonizing. So you do have to end up making those choices in a book like this. But anyway, Pareek, thank you. I think you've really whetted my appetite for going out and reading this book. And I'm looking forward to that. And I'm also looking forward to having more such conversations with you in the near future. To our listeners, tell us what you liked about this episode or didn't like about this episode. And we'd like to hear from you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Aditya. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
And thank you for joining us on All Things Policy.
Please consider signing up for Takshashila's courses. Applications are now open and you can apply at www.takshashila.org.in/courses. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, it's 2021 now. It's time you did. You didn't in 2020. That was bad enough. But now in 2021, you really, really should. It's IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And a quick reminder to everybody, just please help us out with our survey, ivmpodcast.com/survey. We've had a number of you fill it out so far, but we want to shatter last year's number, right? Really, really blow that up. Go fill out the survey over there. If you do, we'll select from the emails that we have got submitted, and we'll be sending out some interesting swag to people. So what should you be listening to this week? First thing I want to talk about is the unprecedented episode. We did a triple crossover. Vineet Kanabar from Storytellers and Storysellers, Varun Dugirala from Advertising is Dead, and Karthik Nagarajan from the Filter Coffee Podcast all got together and put together a mega episode. Do check it out on whichever of their feeds you want. It's available on all three. On Naan Curry, the guy spoke about the history of alcohol in India. It's got a longer history than people would think. Definitely do check it out. Another show I want to call out this week a little bit is The Note by Maruk Inayat. Maruk had 2 fantastic episodes this week. She did her first episode with Amitabh Mattu about the elections in Kashmir, and then she did another one where she told the story of how she faked her identity to interview Benazir Bhutto. Definitely do check it out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.